The silver cities of Lyria stretched across the horizon, shining under twin moons that painted the world in cold, pale light. Princess Arena had grown up here, surrounded by crystal towers and gardens that glowed at night. A life of elegance and freedom, or so she had thought. But freedom was a fragile illusion on Lyria. Her people valued duty above all, and Arena had been taught from the moment she could speak that the needs of the kingdom were far more important than her own desires. Now, as she stood aboard the council ship, staring at the strange human fleet waiting in orbit, her heart sank. Her life had been decided for her. To secure an alliance with these distant humans, she would be married, pushed into a bond with a stranger from another world, another species. She had never met him, and she would have no choice but to exchange vows. The thought twisted in her chest like a cold knife. The doors to the human hall opened, and Arena stepped inside, her gown rustling with the weight of her unease. The humans looked different than she expected, tall, strong, with expressions that were at once simple and unsettlingly honest. And there he was, the human groom. He stood quietly, a stranger in a strange place, yet his calm presence made the air feel heavier. Charged with something she could not name, the ceremony began. Words flowed between them, formal, almost mechanical, but Arena noticed that he listened, not just heard. His gaze met hers briefly, steady, respectful, and it unnerved her more than any anger or fear could. She had been taught humans were primitive, untrustworthy, impulsive, but he did not seem either reckless or cruel. He seemed aware. As the officiant spoke of duty and loyalty, of peace and alliance, Arena bowed her head, expecting coldness, expecting indifference. She expected to feel trapped and helpless. But instead, she felt a tiny spark of curiosity, a faint warmth she could not explain. Was it his gaze, or something deeper, that reached past the walls she had built around herself? After the ceremony, she was led through the human city, a place of strange metals and glowing lights, far from the crystalline elegance of her home. Arena kept her distance, walking silently behind her new husband, yet she noticed how he moved among his people, patient, kind, yet commanding respect without raising his voice. There was a quiet power in the way he existed, a strength that did not demand submission, but inspired it. For hours, Arena explored her new world, and though she tried to remain aloof, she could not help but observe him. He laughed softly with his companions, offered gentle guidance to workers, and at moments, glanced back at her with an expression that seemed to ask if she was all right. That small act, the mere acknowledgement of her existence, stirred something in her she had thought buried under years of royal expectation. That night, in her quarters, Arena could not stop thinking about him. She paced, tugging at the sleeves of her gown, heart racing with confusion. She had been told to fear this human, to see him as a political tool, a necessary pawn in her kingdom's survival. But now, seated by the window, gazing at the pale light of the twin moons, she felt something else. A flicker of fascination, a hint of admiration, and perhaps the tiniest seed of hope. Her life had been forced onto a path she did not choose, yet for the first time, she wondered if this strange human might make it bearable, perhaps even worth living. Arena sank to the floor, drawing her knees to her chest, and allowed herself one quiet thought, almost a whisper to herself. I do not know him, and yet, perhaps he is not what I feared. The shadows of the room stretched long and still, but for the first time in her life, Arena felt that the future might hold something she had never expected. Not just duty, not just obedience, but a possibility of connection, of understanding, of a strange new beginning. And though fear still gripped her heart, curiosity, fragile and tender, began to grow. The silver cities of Lyria stretched across the horizon, shining under twin moons that painted the world in cold, pale light. Princess Arena had grown up here, surrounded by crystal towers and gardens that glowed at night, a life of elegance and freedom, or so she had thought. But freedom was a fragile illusion on Lyria. Her people valued duty above all, and Arina had been taught from the moment she could speak that the needs of the kingdom were far more important than her own desires. Now, as she stood aboard the council ship, staring at the strange human fleet waiting in orbit, her heart sank. Her life had been decided for her. To secure an alliance with these distant humans, she would be married, pushed into a bond with a stranger from another world, another species. She had never met him, and she would have no choice but to exchange vows. The thought twisted in her chest like a cold knife. The doors to the human hall opened, and Arina stepped inside, her gown rustling with the weight of her unease. The humans looked different than she expected, tall, strong, with expressions that were at once simple and unsettlingly honest. And there he was, the human groom. He stood quietly, a stranger in a strange place, yet his calm presence made the air feel heavier. Charged with something she could not name, the ceremony began. Words flowed between them, formal, almost mechanical, but Arina noticed that he listened, not just heard. His gaze met hers briefly, steady, respectful, and it unnerved her more than any anger or fear could. She had been taught humans were primitive, untrustworthy, impulsive, but he did not seem either reckless or cruel. He seemed aware. As the officiant spoke of duty and loyalty, of peace and alliance, Arina bowed her head, expecting coldness, expecting indifference. She expected to feel trapped and helpless. But instead, she felt a tiny spark of curiosity, a faint warmth she could not explain. Was it his gaze or something deeper that reached past the walls she had built around herself? After the ceremony, she was led through the human city, a place of strange metals and glowing lights, far from the crystalline elegance of her home. Arina kept her distance, walking silently behind her new husband, yet she noticed how he moved among his people, patient, kind, yet commanding respect without raising his voice. There was a quiet power in the way he existed, a strength that did not demand submission, but inspired it. For hours, Arina explored her new world, and though she tried to remain aloof, she could not help but observe him. He laughed softly with his companions, offered gentle guidance to workers, and at moments, glanced back at her with an expression that seemed to ask if she was all right. That small act, the mere acknowledgement of her existence, stirred something in her she had thought buried under years of royal expectation. That night, in her quarters, Arina could not stop thinking about him. She paced, tugging at the sleeves of her gown, heart racing with confusion. She had been told to fear this human, to see him as a political tool, a necessary pawn in her kingdom's survival. But now, seated by the window, gazing at the pale light of the twin moons, she felt something else. A flicker of fascination, a hint of admiration, and perhaps the tiniest seed of hope. Her life had been forced onto a path she did not choose, yet for the first time, she wondered if this strange human might make it bearable, perhaps even worth living. Arina sank to the floor, drawing her knees to her chest, and allowed herself one quiet thought, almost a whisper to herself. I do not know him, and yet, perhaps he is not what I feared. The shadows of the room stretched long and still, but for the first time in her life, Arina felt that the future might hold something she had never expected. Not just duty, not just obedience, but a possibility of connection, of understanding, of a strange new beginning. And though fear still gripped her heart, curiosity, fragile and tender, began to grow. The calm of the human settlement shattered one night with the distant roar of alarms. Arina woke to the harsh red glow that bathed her quarters. Panic rippled through the corridors as sirens blared and voices shouted in a language she barely understood. She had never imagined that her new life could be so sudden, so terrifying. Her heart thumped wildly as she tried to make sense of the chaos. The humans were running, shouting directions, pulling others to safety. And through it all, she saw her human groom moving with calm determination, weaving through the panicked crowd, guiding them, protecting them. His presence was a strange anchor amid the chaos, and despite the fear clawing at her chest, she felt a pull toward him. When a blast shook the settlement, throwing her to the floor, he was there in an instant. He grasped her hand with a firm but gentle grip, pulling her behind a protective wall. "Stay close to me," he commanded softly, not shouting, but every word carried strength. Irina's pulse raced, but something in the steadiness of his voice eased her panic. Through the smoke and flashing lights, he led her past fallen debris and frightened citizens. He shielded her from danger, placing himself between her and the sparks of destruction that rained around them. She realized in a rush of clarity that this human did not just follow protocol. He made decisions. He risked himself. He put others first without hesitation. His courage was quiet but unshakable, and for the first time, Irina felt admiration mix with her fear. They reached a secure chamber where the wounded were being treated. She expected relief, yet her chest tightened as she saw him continue to move among the injured, offering comfort, tending to those who could barely stand. He did not once complain or falter. Irina watched, mesmerized. She had grown up learning about strategy and politics, about leaders who commanded with authority. But she had never seen anyone inspire trust through action alone. In the chaos, their eyes met briefly, and something unspoken passed between them. It was not words, not even a promise, it was a recognition. He saw her, really saw her, not as a pawn, not as a princess, but as someone fragile, someone human, someone worth protecting. Irina's heart trembled in a way that was new, shocking, and thrilling. She felt fear, yes, but also a strange surge of something stronger. Hope. Hours later, when the alarms quieted and the smoke cleared, the settlement bore scars, but no lives had been lost. Irina leaned against a wall, exhausted, her chest heaving. He approached, brushing dust from his sleeves, and offered her a hand. She hesitated, then took it, and the contact was electric, not in a way that startled, but in a way that warmed and steadied her. "You were brave," he said softly, eyes meeting hers. "You didn't run. You didn't hide." Irina shook her head, uncertain. "I was terrified," she admitted. I don't know how I didn't." "You stayed," he interrupted gently. "That is bravery too." For the first time, she understood that courage was not the absence of fear, but action despite it. And she understood, too, that he was not the cold foreign stranger she had expected. He was human in the way she had feared, but human in a way she had never imagined, capable of empathy, courage, and a quiet strength that moved her to the core. That night, as she returned to her quarters, Irina's mind was a whirl of emotions. She had been forced into this marriage, yes. She had been unwilling, frightened, uncertain. But now, after witnessing the depth of his character, the truth began to dawn on her. She did not only respect him. Something in her heart had shifted, trembling, awakening, reaching toward a connection she had once thought impossible. Her fear had not vanished, but it had changed. It was no longer the fear of obligation alone. It was the fear of acknowledging the truth, the startling realization that she might care for this human, and that he might already have touched a part of her she had hidden even from herself. For the first time, Irina did not dread the presence of her groom. She felt faintly a spark of trust, of admiration, and perhaps the beginnings of something more, a bond forged not by duty, but by courage, presence, and the quiet power of a human heart that refused to yield. The morning after the attack, the human settlement was alive with quiet activity. Repairs were underway, injured citizens moved with care, and everywhere Irina looked, she saw resilience in action. She had spent her life in Lyria surrounded by order and elegance, where beauty was crafted and maintained meticulously. But here, in this human world, she saw a different kind of beauty, a living, breathing strength, built from courage, compassion, and the will to endure. Her human groom appeared beside her in the garden. where sunlight filtered through the strange, towering trees. He held a small tool and adjusted a leaning plant, his hands gentle but precise. When he noticed her watching, he smiled, not the polite, formal smile of a diplomat, but the kind that reached his eyes and felt real. "Good morning," he said softly. "The storm left a lot of damage, but the plants are resilient, just like us." Arina studied him. He spoke simply, but each word carried care. In his presence, she felt her defenses begin to shift. She had always believed that humans were chaotic, impulsive, and unpredictable. Yet here was one, calm and thoughtful, guiding and nurturing with a patience that made her heart stir. He motioned for her to come closer, and reluctantly, Arina stepped forward. He showed her how to tie the vine to a support post, explaining how gentle pressure and attention could help it grow straight. She followed his instructions carefully, feeling the warmth of his guidance, and for the first time, she noticed the way he watched her, not as a superior, not as a teacher, but as someone who genuinely valued her efforts. "You are learning quickly," he said, eyes meeting hers. "But more importantly, you are trying. That matters more than speed." Arina felt a flutter in her chest. His words were simple, yet they struck a chord deep within her. She had been raised to perform perfectly, to excel at every task, yet no one had ever spoken to her this way, acknowledging effort, not just results. The realization unsettled her and filled her with quiet admiration. Over the next days, he invited her to see more of his world. They walked through human libraries filled with stories of struggle, hope, and triumph. He read aloud passages, sometimes pausing to ask her thoughts, sometimes just letting her listen. Arina discovered that humans valued knowledge, emotion, and connection in ways her people often overlooked. She was fascinated not only by the stories but by the passion with which he shared them. One evening, they returned to the garden, the twin moons reflecting on the soft surface of the pond. He spoke quietly of his home, of the values humans held dear, of the courage it took to survive in a universe that was often harsh and unkind. Arina listened, enthralled. She had always thought of humans as simple creatures, guided by instinct and ambition. But she saw now that they were capable of extraordinary depth strength, tempered by compassion. Intelligence softened by empathy. "You do not have to feel anything yet," he said gently, noticing her attention. "But I hope you will let yourself understand at least what makes us human." Arina's heart tightened. She had not expected to be moved by a stranger's words. And yet, she was. Slowly, the walls she had built around herself, walls of fear, pride, and duty, began to crumble. She realized that admiration was turning into something warmer, something personal. Something that made her chest ache in a way that was unfamiliar but undeniable. For the first time since her engagement, she allowed herself a quiet thought, a whisper she did not dare say aloud. Perhaps this marriage is not a prison. Perhaps he can teach me a way to live that I have never known. That night, lying in her quarters, Arina felt a strange mix of emotions: fear, hope, curiosity, and awe. The human had not demanded her heart, yet he had stirred it nonetheless. She did not yet know what the future held, but for the first time, she felt that it could hold more than duty and obedience. It could hold understanding, connection, and maybe, in time, something like trust. Or even love. Arina's days began to blur into one another. The settlement had returned to a fragile peace after the attack, yet the memory of danger lingered in her mind, a quiet reminder of how quickly life could change. Each time she saw her human groom, her chest tightened, a mixture of awe, confusion, and something she did not yet understand. She found herself thinking of him constantly. Not in the dutiful way she was supposed to think of a partner, not as an obligation, but in moments she could not control. The way he moved through the settlement with calm assurance, the patience in his hands when he tended the injured or repaired the damaged structures, the kindness in his gaze when he acknowledged her presence, all of it left her unsettled. Her heart was trembling, though she did not yet know why. Despite herself, Arena began to seek his company, though cautiously. She lingered in the garden when she thought he might be there, careful not to appear obvious. She watched him speak with others, how he listened, how he guided, how he inspired without demanding. There was a magnetism to him, quiet but impossible to ignore. And yet, she fought her own feelings, reminding herself that she had been thrust into this marriage, that duty had brought them together, and that any warmth in her chest was a dangerous indulgence. One evening, as the twin moons cast silver light across the garden, Arena fled to the observation deck, desperate for solitude. She pressed her hands against the cool glass, watching the settlement glow below, her mind a storm of conflicting emotions. She had never felt so lost. Fear, admiration, confusion, curiosity, they all collided inside her. Leaving her shaken dot, he appeared quietly behind her, not startling her, but offering presence without demand. "The night is beautiful," he said softly, though it was more a statement than a question. He did not touch her, did not intrude, but stood close enough that she could feel his steady energy. Arena did not respond. She could not. Words would betray the storm inside her. Instead, she leaned slightly against the glass, letting her thoughts drift while he simply waited, patient, unwavering. There was a trust in his silence, an understanding that words were not always necessary. Finally she spoke, her voice trembling. I do not understand my own heart." He turned to her, eyes gentle but piercing. "Then allow it to speak slowly," he replied. "Do not fight it. Do not hide from it. Feel what you feel, and let time show you its meaning." His words struck her more deeply than she expected. It was not advice she had heard before. It was permission, given with no demand or expectation. She realized that her human groom was not simply a figure of duty, not merely a partner assigned to her by political necessity. He was patient, observant, and willing to give her space to discover herself. The realization made her chest ache and tremble in a way that left her breathless. Over the next days, Arena found herself thinking about him differently. She noticed the small things, the way he hummed while working, the way he smiled at a child who had dropped a tool, the quiet way he encouraged others without drawing attention to himself. Each moment added to the strange, growing warmth inside her. She had begun to trust him. She had begun to admire him. And though she tried to deny it, a part of her heart was beginning to hope for something more. One night, after a long day of helping in the settlement, she watched him sitting alone in the garden, the glow of the twin moons catching the edges of his form. For the first time, she allowed herself to move closer, to sit beside him, her presence acknowledged but not questioned. And in that quiet, shared moment, Arena realized something terrifying and exhilarating. She was beginning to care for him, not out of duty, not out of obligation, but because of who he was and the impossible way he made her heart tremble. Days passed, and the bond between Arena and the human groom began to deepen in ways she had not anticipated. What had started as curiosity and cautious admiration had grown into something more tangible, something that made her chest ache and her heart tremble with a strange, delicate intensity. She found herself thinking of him constantly, not just in fleeting moments, but in the quiet hours when she was alone. When the world felt still and expansive, the settlement faced yet another challenge, a sudden storm, fierce and unrelenting, that threatened to destroy crops and homes alike. Arena felt fear rise within her, remembering the panic of the previous attack. But this time, she was not paralyzed. She moved with purpose, guided by the quiet confidence that had begun to root itself within her since meeting him. He met her in the central courtyard. Rain already beginning to fall, and without hesitation, he took her hand. "We need to help them," he said firmly, eyes blazing with resolve. There was no question in his tone, only determination. Arena felt her heart swell. She had been pushed into this marriage, forced into a role she had never chosen. Yet here he was, treating her as an equal, as someone capable, someone valuable. Together, they guided people to safety, moving through the storm with careful efficiency. He showed her how to prioritize, how to calm panic, how to inspire courage in others without raising his voice. Arena marveled at his ability to act decisively, calmly, and with unwavering compassion. And through it all, he never treated her as fragile or incapable. Instead, he encouraged her, trusted her, and let her contribute in ways she had never imagined possible. When the storm passed, the settlement bore scars, but the people were safe. Exhausted, soaked, and shivering, Arena found herself beside him in the quiet aftermath. They surveyed the courtyard together, watching survivors begin the long process of repair. She felt a rush of gratitude, admiration, and something deeper, a trembling warmth she could no longer deny. He glanced at her, eyes soft but steady. "You were brave today," he said quietly. "Not just in action, but in heart. You stood with them, you helped them, and you never faltered." Arena felt a shiver run through her. She had always believed courage was about strength, about fearlessness. But she realized now that bravery could also be about persistence, about kindness, about standing with others even when your own heart is uncertain. And in that moment, she understood that he had been teaching her this all along, not through words, but through example. As they walked back toward the settlement, the twin moons reflecting off the wet streets, Arena felt her heart tremble in a way that was no longer confusing. She trusted him. She admired him. She wanted to be near him, to learn from him, to share in his strength. For the first time, she felt a warmth in her chest that had nothing to do with duty and everything to do with choice. That night, in the quiet of their shared quarters, Arena found herself speaking honestly for the first time. I do not know how to say this," she admitted, voice barely above a whisper. "But I trust you. I admire you. You make me feel seen." He took her hands in his, steady and warm. "Then know this," he said gently. "I do not ask for anything in return. I simply wish to stand by you, to protect you, to face whatever comes together. That is all I can offer and all I hope you will allow." Arena's chest tightened, and for the first time, she allowed herself to smile without fear. The walls she had built around her heart were crumbling, replaced by trust, respect, and a fragile, trembling affection that she dared not yet name, but that she could no longer deny. She had been pushed into this marriage, yes, but in the quiet, in the storm, in the strength of this human beside her, Arena realized something remarkable. Her heart had begun to awaken, and it trembled not with fear, but with awe, hope, and the stirring promise of something more. The settlement had quieted after the storm, the streets glistening with rain, reflecting the twin moons above. Arena walked beside the human groom, her hand brushing his as they moved. She had never imagined that a simple touch could feel so electric, so grounding, so alive. Her heart trembled, not from fear or obligation, but from the unspoken connection that had grown between them, slowly, quietly, irresistibly. For weeks, she had struggled with her emotions, torn between duty and curiosity, between caution and the faint spark of admiration that had turned into something more. But tonight, as she walked beside him, she no longer questioned her feelings. She understood them, embraced them, and allowed herself to trust the rhythm of her own heart. They reached the garden, where the plants he had tended glowed softly under the moonlight. He stopped, turning to face her, eyes calm but full of warmth. "Arena," he said, his voice low and steady, "I know this has not been easy. You were forced into this bond, yet you have given me something unexpected, your presence, your trust, your courage. I do not take it lightly." Arena met his gaze, feeling a rush of emotion that left her breathless. I did not know at first," she admitted. "I was afraid. I did not know you. I thought I would only feel duty, only obligation. But you showed me something I never expected. You showed me courage, patience, kindness. And I cannot ignore it." He smiled softly, a gentle light in the darkness. "Then let us not ignore it," he said simply. "Whatever this bond began as, we can choose what it becomes. I do not ask for anything more than honesty, and I offer the same in return." For the first time, Irina felt a weight lift from her shoulders, the burden of duty, of expectation, of fear. She had been pushed into this marriage, yet she had discovered something far greater than obligation. She had discovered a human who could inspire awe not through power or authority, but through simple, unwavering humanity. Her heart trembled because it recognized something rare, something extraordinary. Slowly, she stepped closer, closing the space between them. "I trust you," she whispered. "I admire you. I want to be with you, not because I must, but because I choose to." The human took both her hands, holding them gently, firmly, as if anchoring her to the world. "And I choose you, Irina," he said. "Not as a duty, not as a pact, but because of who you are. Because of the courage you carry, the heart you hide, and the light you bring into this world." Tears pricked her eyes, but they were not tears of fear or sorrow. They were tears of release, of gratitude, of awe. Her heart, once confined by expectation and fear, now trembled freely, alive in a way she had never known. They stood together in the moonlit garden. The stars reflected in the pond beside them, the settlement quiet, but full of life. The alien princess and the human groom, two beings from different worlds, forced together by circumstance, now stood as equals, united by trust, respect, and the quiet awakening of love. Irina realized with a swell of emotion that her life had changed, not because she had followed the path laid before her, but because she had opened her heart to something greater than fear. Humans were strange, unpredictable, and yet extraordinary. They could teach courage, inspire awe, and awaken feelings she had never imagined. Her hand rested in his, her head lifting to meet his gaze. She felt no chains, no obligation, no doubt. Only possibility, wonder, and a trembling joy that spread through every part of her being. She had been pushed into marriage, yes, but the human had revealed something far beyond expectation, something that made her heart tremble with hope, admiration, and awe. And for the first time, Irina allowed herself to believe in a future she had never dared to imagine. Together, they would face the universe, not as pawn and obligation, but as partners, equals, and perhaps, in time, as something far stronger, two hearts bound by choice, courage, and the extraordinary humanity of one another. Her heart trembled, and it felt magnificent,